People think the hardest thing about my post is the standing. The cold, the weight of the bearskin, the hours that pool in your boots until your feet stop being feet. They are wrong, but I let them be wrong, because the truth takes longer to say, and most of them are only passing through. The hardest thing about my post is the not answering. I have stood the sable gate of Harlow Court for 11 years now, and in that time I have been spat near, leaned on, photographed 10,000 times, called names in 4 languages, dared, prodded, and once, by a boy who could not have been 6, offered half a toffee that I was not permitted to take. I have stood through a hailstorm that turned the forecourt white, and through a summer so still the air itself seemed to be waiting for orders. None of it moved me. That is the whole of the craft, if you want to call it a craft. A man stands where he is told and does not answer, and the world streams past him like water past a stone. I tell you this so you understand what kind of man I was on the morning the Kessin column came through the arch, and why what happened that morning took the shape it did. It was not a brawl. There was no blow struck. If you came looking for that you may go, I have nothing for you. What happened at the Sable Gate that autumn was quieter than a brawl, and it has lasted me the rest of my life. It was late in the year. The chestnuts along the carriageway had let go their leaves, and the leaves had gone from gold to a wet brown that the groundsmen swept, and the wind returned. The sky was the flat gray of beaten pewter, the kind of overcast that gives a man no shadow and no comfort, and a cold came up off the river that found the seams of the tunic and sat there. We had been told a fortnight in advance that the Kessin Dominion was sending a delegation, and that at its head would be a soldier. Not a minister, not an envoy with soft hands and a satchel of papers, a soldier, General Aldous Brandt. You will not have heard the name, and I will not pretend you should have. Kessin lies a long way east of Tregarn, beyond the Marin Hills, and the wars that made Brandt famous were Kessin wars, fought for Kessin reasons, in valleys I have never seen. But a soldier knows the names of soldiers the way a mason knows the great cathedrals he will never build. Brandt had broken a siege at a place called Holt that the manuals say could not be broken. He had marched a relief force across the Vorl in winter, and lost fewer men doing it than most commanders lose to their own carelessness in peacetime. He was, by every measure the books use, a great captain, and he knew it. That is the part the books leave out, because the books are written by men who want to be invited back. We had the gate prepared 3 days before he came. Brass to a mirror, the wool brushed against the nap and then with it, the bearskins combed, the white gloves drawn from their paper as if they were relics. Sergeant Major O'Leary walked the line at dawn each of those days with his hands clasped behind him and said almost nothing, which from O'Leary was the highest form of dread. On the morning itself he stopped in front of me, looked once at the ribbon at my throat, and looked away again. He never spoke of it, O'Leary. He was one of perhaps a dozen men at Harlow who knew what the ribbon was, and he carried the knowing the way you carry a coal in your bare hand, carefully, and without drawing attention to the burn. "They'll walk the line," he said to all of us low. "The general's a reviewing man. He'll want to see you sweat and he'll want to see you can't. Give him the second and not the first." Then he set us, and we became what we are when we are set, which is furniture that breathes. I want to be honest about the ribbon, because the whole of it turns on the ribbon, and I have spent 11 years trying not to look at it. I did not always stand a gate. There was a time when I held other ground. I will not make a tale of Karran Ridge. The men who make tales of it were not there, and the men who were there do not make tales. I will tell you only what is needed, and then I will set it down, the way O'Leary set us down, and let it stand. Karran Ridge is a pass in the high country on the old eastern march, a saddle of bare rock and gorse between 2 shoulders of mountain, and whoever holds the pass holds the only road a column can take in winter without dying of the trying. We were sent to hold it, a company of us, under a captain named Hadley whom I loved the way you love a man you would follow into the cold ground, which as it happened is what I did. We were to hold the pass for 2 days while a relief force came up behind us through the lower valley. We held it for 3 days and a morning, because the relief force was slow, and because the people on the other side of the saddle did not stop coming. I will not describe them coming. There are children who may one day read this, and I have nothing to gain by it. I will say only that they came in a number that made arithmetic feel like a kind of lie, wave on wave up the gorse slope into the throat of the pass, and that on the first day there were 80 of us, and on the morning of the fourth day there was me. That is all. There was me. I walked down off the ridge into the arms of the relief column at the hour they finally crested the valley, and I was the only man who walked. Captain Hadley did not walk. Sergeant Cole did not walk. Young Renick, who had a sister he wrote to in a hand like a child's, did not walk. I have their names, all 80, and I say them to myself on certain nights the way other men say prayers, because someone has to, and the someone is me. They gave me the ribbon for it, the Tregarn Star, our highest, which the crown gives so rarely that there are years it gives none at all. They gave it to me in a hall full of standing men, and I stood and let them. And when it was done, I asked the only thing I have ever asked of the crown, which was to be allowed to stop fighting. Not to be discharged. I had nowhere to go, and nothing I knew how to be but a soldier. To be allowed to put down the killing part of it and pick up the standing part of it. To guard a gate where no one would ever come up the slope at me again. They gave me that too. They sent me to the Sable Gate, and there I have stood, and the ribbon stands at my throat where the regulations require it, a small thing of crimson and gray that 900 tourists a day photograph without knowing what it is, and that I do not look at, because to look at it is to be back on the ridge with the gorse and the names. So, now you know what Brant did not know. On the morning he came through the arch and decided I was a toy. The column came in at the third hour. You heard it before you saw it. The Kessin do their cavalry differently, a heavier horse, and the iron of their shoes came off the carriageway stone in a sound like a slow drum. Then the outriders, then the carriages, then the general's own party on horseback, and at the head of it, on a gray that he sat the way a man sits a chair he owns, General Aldous Brant. He was older than I had pictured him, which is a foolish thing to admit, but we picture great men young and then they have the impertinence to age. He was perhaps 60, broad and square, with a face that had been handsome and was now merely strong, the strength of a wall rather than a man. He wore the Kessin field gray rather than ceremonial dress, which was itself a kind of speech. I am a working soldier, and your gilt and your bearskins are a costume. His own breast carried a row of his own honors, real ones, earned ones. I will not pretend otherwise. He had bled, somewhere, more than once. The trouble with Brant was never that he had not bled. The trouble was that he believed bleeding was a country with a wall around it, and that he had drawn the map, and that men who had not crossed his particular border were not citizens of it. He dismounted in the forecourt, and our king's deputy met him, the Marshal of the court, Lord Edric Vane, a lean old soldier himself, who had been at the War Ministry in the years of the Eastern March, and who, though I did not let myself think it at the time, knew exactly what the ribbon at my throat was, because he had been in the hall when it was pinned there. The two of them spoke the courtesies. There was to be a review of the gate guard, a small honor, the kind a host pays a soldier guest. Come and look at my finest, who stands so still. And Brant, I saw, was pleased by it in the wrong way. He did not look at us the way a soldier looks at soldiers. He looked at us the way a man at a fair looks at a row of painted horses on a carousel, deciding which one his money will ride. They started down the line from the eastern end. Vane walked at Brant's left and a half step back, as a host does. And behind them came the general's aides and a clutch of our own staff officers, and behind those, kept at the rope, the tourists, who had realized something was happening and had begun to do what tourists do, which is raise their devices and film. I heard Brant before I could see him clearly. He had a carrying voice, the voice of a man used to being heard across a field, and he did not lower it for the line. "How long?" he asked Vane, loud enough for the whole line to take it. "Do you keep them out here?" 2 hours on, 4 off in winter, Vane said. 2 hours. Brant made a sound that was almost a laugh. We'd court-martial a man for standing about 2 hours. Where I come from, a soldier who stops moving is a soldier waiting to be killed. He had reached the third man down, Pell, a good lad of 22, and he stopped and looked Pell up and down the way you look at a horse's teeth. "Pretty," he said. "Very pretty. Did he ever hold a rifle that's been fired?" "All of them have qualified, General," Vane said. "Qualified?" Again the not quite laugh. "On a range, at paper," he moved on. "You have a museum here, Marshal, and you've dressed it in red and stood it up at your gate so the visitors have something to photograph. I don't blame you, it's good for trade, but don't tell me it's an army." You will understand that none of this was new to me. A man does not stand the Sable Gate for 11 years without learning that the world is full of brants, smaller ones, who say smaller versions of the same thing. They're not real, they can't do anything. Watch, I'll make him laugh. The craft is the same against a drunk at midnight and a general at noon. You become the stone, and you let the water go past. I had let so much water go past me that I had begun to think nothing in it could reach the stone. I was wrong, but it took him a while to find the crack, and to his credit, I will give the man this much now, with the years between us. When he found it like a soldier, which is to say he found the thing I valued and he went straight at it. He reached me a little after noon. I was the 7th man in the line, near the gate itself, where the stone of the arch rose up behind me with the Tregarn lion cut into the keystone, whether to a soft gray lump that you had to know was a lion to see. Brant stopped in front of me the way he had stopped in front of the others, and did the looking up and down, and I gave him what we give, which is nothing. Eyes forward past his shoulder, at a point on the far wall I have stared at so long I could draw the mortar lines from memory. Breath even. The world streaming past the stone. "This one," Brant said, "thinks he's made of marble." I have been told since, by men who were near, that I did not so much as blink. I believe them. I was not trying not to blink. I was simply not there, in the way you learn to not be there, standing a few rooms back inside your own skull where the noise can't open the door. "Look at me," Brant said. I did not look at him. Stepped closer. I could smell the cold on his greatcoat, and under it, horse and pipe smoke and the faint iron smell that clings to men who have been a long time around weapons. "I gave a great many men that order in my life," he said, lower now, just for me, the carrying voice drawn down to a blade's edge. "Men who'd been 3 days without sleep. Men who'd watched their friends opened up in front of them. They looked at me. Everyone. Because I was the last thing between them and the dark, and they knew it." He waited. I did not look. "And you," he said, "you painted soldier, you won't look at me because some clerk wrote a rule on a card. That's the difference between your kind and mine. Mine obey because they understand. Yours obey because they've never had a reason not to." I want to be precise about what was happening in me, because it is the heart of the thing. Most of the men I have stood against in 11 years insult the costume. They mock the bearskin, the gloves, the stillness, the parts of me that are, in truth, a costume, and that I do not mind their mocking because a costume is only cloth. Brant was not mocking the costume. Brant had reached past the cloth, with the unerring aim of a man who has spent his life finding the soft place in a wall, and he had put his finger directly on the one thing I had carried down off Karran Ridge, that I would have died a second time to keep clean. He had told me, to my face, in front of my own gate, that I did not know what it was to be the last thing between living men and the dark. I knew exactly what it was. I had been it. I had been it for 3 days and a morning, and I had failed at it 79 times, and I carried the 79 names like coals in a bare hand. And this man, this great captain, who had broken a siege and crossed a winter river, this man whom I would, in another life, have followed into the cold ground gladly, this man was standing 8 inches from my face telling me I was a painted thing that had never bled. And I could not answer. That is the part you must understand. It was not that I did not wish to answer. There rose up in me in that gray noon the strongest wish to answer I have felt in my life, stronger than thirst, stronger than the wish to sleep that had nearly killed me on the ridge. I wished to say his own names back to him. I wished to say, "General, I will trade you. I will give you my 3 days at Karran for your siege at Holt, and we will see which of us still has paint on him at the end." The words were so close behind my teeth that I could taste them. And I did not say them. I did not say them because of a card with a rule on it, exactly as he had said. A clerk had written that rule, exactly as he had said. He had me dead to rights on the facts and entirely wrong on the meaning, and the gap between his facts and his meaning is the whole of what I have to give you, so let me try to lay it across the page where you can see it. He thought the rule on the card was a leash. He thought it was the thing that made a man small, obey because you've never had a reason not to. He had it exactly backwards. The rule on the card was not the leash. The rule on the card was the rifle Captain Hadley had handed me on the second night at Karran, when my own had jammed, and the slope was coming alive again in the dark, and he had pressed his spare into my hands and said, "Hold," where just hold, that's all, just hold, and then gone forward to a place he did not come back from so that I could. Holding is not the absence of a reason to break. Holding is having every reason in the world to break, and not breaking, because some other man is depending on the line staying where you put it. Brant had spent his whole career on the breaking edge of war, the charge, the relief, the siege thrown back, and he had come, somewhere along the way, to believe that the breaking was the soldiering, and that the holding was for men too soft or too stupid to break. He had forgotten that every charge he ever led was only possible because somewhere behind him, some painted man he never thought about was holding a line so that the general would have a wall to charge from. I knew this standing there with his breath on me, but knowing a thing and being able to say it are two different countries, and I was not a citizen of the second one. So I held. I gave him the stone and let the water go past, and the water was the worst water I had ever stood against, and I did not move. He saw that he had not moved me, and it angered him. The way it engages a man to put his shoulder to a door he is sure is rotten and feel it not give. "Nothing," he said. He turned half toward Vane to make it a performance again, the carrying voice coming back up. "You see, nothing behind the eyes, there's no man in there, Marshal. There's a posture. You could prop a coat on a frame and get the same value." He turned back to me, and now there was a meanness in it that had not been there at the start, the meanness of a proud man who has been refused. "What would it take," he said, "to get a flinch out of you? If I were the enemy, if I came up that road in earnest, not in a carriage, would you stand here and let me walk past you into your king's house? Is that the training? Stand pretty and die surprised?" And then he did the thing that I have turned over in my mind more times than any other thing in this story, because it was the thing that, by every right, should have ended my 11 years of stone in a single second. He reached up with 2 fingers, and he flicked the ribbon at my throat. He did it idly almost, the way you flick a bit of lint. He did not know what it was. To him it was one more bit of the costume, one more ribbon among the gilt, a thing the museum had pinned on the frame to make it look like a man. He flicked the Tregarn star, the thing they had given me in the standing hall for the worst 3 days and morning of my life, the thing that stood at my throat for 80 men who did not walk. He flicked it with 2 fingers as though it were dust, and he said, "What's this one for? Best turnout. Most polished buttons." I have stood the Sable Gate through a hailstorm. I have been struck, once, by a man out of his mind on something, a real blow that split my lip, and I did not move until the relief came and took him, and Olery walked me off the post, and only then let me touch my own face. I had thought before that gray noon that there was no longer anything in the world that could move me, that the ridge had burned out of me whatever it is in a man that flinches. When Brant flicked the star, something in me came up off the floor of my skull and put both hands on the door. I did not open it. I want to be clear, because the not opening is the only thing in this whole account I am proud of. I did not open the door, but for the first time in 11 years I felt it, felt the whole weight of myself leaning on it from the inside, felt how thin the wood was, felt how badly I wanted to let the names out, all 80 of them, and watch them knock this great captain flat. Renick, who wrote to his sister, Cole, who taught me to splint a leg in the dark. Hadley, who pressed his rifle into my hands and said, "Hold." Hadley said, "Hold." So I held. God help me, I held the door, and the general flicked my dead men's medal a second time and laughed, and I gave him the stone. What I did not know, what I could not have known, standing a few rooms back inside my own skull, was that Lord Edric Vane, the Marshal of the court, had gone very still. I have the rest of it from him, and from O'Leary, and from a young aide of Brant's own who told it to one of our officers later over drink, the way the truth of a thing leaks out sideways from the men who were near it. So I will give it to you as it came to me, and you will trust me that I am not painting it, because by then I was the only man in the forecourt with no idea what was about to happen. Vane stepped forward. He did not hurry. He was an old soldier, and old soldiers do not hurry. Hurry is a thing you spend in your 20s. He came up on Brant's right, and he looked, not at Brant, but at the ribbon the general's fingers had just left. "General Brant," Vane said, "may I ask you a question, soldier to soldier?" Brant liked that. You could see it. Soldier to soldier, he had been trying to get the host to admit all morning that there were soldiers here and museum pieces there, and now the host's own marshal had said it for him. "Of course," he said. "You teach, I believe," Vane said, "at the War College at Brent, your Dominion's finest. They say you give a lecture there yourself each year to the senior class, on the holding of ground." "Do?" Brant's chest came up a half-inch. "On the holding of ground against superior numbers. It's the hardest thing a soldier is asked to do, Marshal, and the rarest done well. Most men can charge. Charging is easy. You've only to be braver than your fear for a single minute. Holding, and here I am told he warmed to it because it was his subject and he loved it, holding is being braver than your fear for 3 days. There's no glory in it while it's happening. No movement, no charge to carry you. Just you and the line and the dark coming up the slope. I tell my cadets there is no harder thing, and no finer." And in that lecture, Vane said, and his voice did not change at all, which is the part that I think frightened Brant most when he understood it. "Do you still use the example you are famous for using? The one the cadets write home about? The hold at the Eastern Pass, the company of 80 that was sent to hold a saddle for 2 days and held it for 3 days and a morning, against a number the histories still argue over, until the relief came up the valley. You teach that one, I think, as the high example, the thing the rest of us should measure ourselves against." I am told that the forecourt had gone quiet. Even the tourists, who understood none of it, had felt the change in the air the way animals feel weather, and the filming devices were still raised, but no one was speaking behind the rope. "Karran Ridge," Brant said. And now the aide told it this way. Now there was a different note in his voice, the careful note of a man who has been handed something and does not yet know if it is a gift or a blade. "Yes, I teach Karran Ridge. Every soldier from Brent to the sea teaches Karran Ridge. It's the finest defensive action of the age, Marshal, your age or mine. 80 men. 3 days. I would give," and here he stopped, because he was an honest man underneath the pride, and the honesty made him say it. "I have stood in front of 200 cadets and told them I am not sure I could have done it. That I do not know if I have it in me to hold like that, to not break. The histories say there was one survivor. One man walked off that ridge. I have wondered all my life what kind of man that was. I have wanted, I'll confess it, to meet him. To stand in front of him for 1 minute and find out what he's made of, because I am not certain it is the same thing the rest of us are made of." And Lord Edric Vane, Marshal of the Court of Tregarn, turned and looked at me, at the 7th man in the line, the painted soldier, the coat on a frame, who had not moved, who was standing a few rooms back inside his own skull with both hands on the door, and he said quietly, so that it carried only as far as it needed to, "Then I would like to introduce you, General. This is Sergeant Cadmanware. The ribbon you flicked at his throat is the Tregarn Star. We do not give it lightly. There are years we give none. We gave it to him for the thing you teach your cadets they should measure themselves against." He let that sit 1 moment in the cold air. "He is the man who walked off Karran Ridge. He is the survivor you have wanted all your life to meet. He has been standing 8 inches from your face for the better part of 10 minutes, and you have spent them telling him he has never bled. I felt the change in the forecourt before I understood it. You learn that, on a gate, to feel a crowd's weather without looking at it. The quiet went from one kind to another, and then, into that quiet, I heard a sound I will remember past the day I die, and it was the sound of a great captain understanding what he had done. He did not bluster. I will give him that finally and fully, because it is the measure of why this is a story worth telling and not just a story worth laughing at. A small man, caught out, blusters. A small man would have said, well, how was I to know, or he might have spoken up, or found some way to make his cruelty my fault for being silent under it. Brant did none of those things. Brant was a great soldier who had done a shameful thing in ignorance, and the moment the ignorance was lifted, the soldier in him did what the soldier in him knew to do. He stepped back 1 pace, and he took off his cap. I was still not looking at him. I want you to understand that the discipline held all the way through, that I never once broke the post. But a man at the edge of his vision can see a great deal, and I saw the gray field cap come off the gray head, and I saw the general of the Kesson Dominion, the breaker of the siege at Holt, the man who had crossed the Vorl in winter, draw himself up in front of a guard he had called a toy, and salute me. He held it. He held the salute the way O'Leary had taught us to hold the post, the way Hadley had taught me to hold the line, longer than the form required, because the form was not the point. The point was the holding. And then, into the quiet, in the carrying voice that had spent all morning making me smaller, he said the only words I have ever wanted to keep from that day. Sergeant Ware, I have been a soldier for 40 years, and I have just learned that I did not know what the word meant. I came to your gate this morning believing I was the only true soldier in the forecourt. I was standing in front of the only one. His voice was not steady. A great captain's voice, and it was not steady. Forgive me, not for my sake, for the 80. I have taught their hold for 20 years, and I flicked your ribbon like it was lint. Forgive me. And then he did a thing that Vane told me afterward he had never seen a foreign officer do, and never expected to. He turned, with his cap still in his hand, to the rope where the crowd stood with their devices raised, and he said to all of them, to the whole gray forecourt, "You are filming the wrong thing. You film him standing still, and you think the stillness is the show. The stillness is not the show. The stillness is the cost. This man has held a line for you that you will never have to see, and he is holding one now in front of me that is harder than the one at the ridge, because at the ridge he had a rifle, and here he has only the rule on a card and his own honor, and I gave him every reason in the world to break it, and he did not break. Put that in your little machines. That is what a soldier is, not the charge, the not breaking. I did not move. I want you to know that I did not move through any of it, not when Vane named the star, not when Brant took off his cap, not when a great captain asked an unmoving man for forgiveness in front of 200 strangers. The door held. The name stayed in. The stone let the water go past, all of it, the cruel water, and then, harder to stand than the cruel water, the kind. But I will tell you the truth of the inside of it, because I have told you the truth of everything else, and I will not flinch from this last part. When General Aldous Brant said for the 80, when this stranger, this man who had hurt me worse that morning than anyone had hurt me since the ridge itself, stood in the cold and asked forgiveness not for himself but for my dead, something happened behind the unmoving face that had not happened in 11 years on the gate, and that I had half believed could not happen to me any more. Behind the still face the painted soldier wept, not where any device could film it, not where Brant could see it, or Vane, or the crowd. Inside the few rooms back where I had been standing all morning, the 7th man in the line, the coat on the frame, put his hands over his face at last and wept for Hadley and Cole and young Renick, who wrote to his sister, wept the way I had not let myself weep in the standing hall when they pinned the star on me, wept because someone who understood the cost had finally said the names were worth something, and not one drop of it reached my eyes, because the rule on the card said it must not. And Hadley had said hold, and I held. That is the craft, if you want to call it a craft. That is the thing the tourists photograph and call stillness. A man stands where he is told. He does not answer. And the world streams past him like water past a stone. And sometimes the water is grief, and sometimes it is cruelty. And once, on a gray noon, it was a great captain learning what the word soldier costs, and through all of it the stone holds, because somewhere behind it there are 80 names and someone has to keep them, and the someone is me. They relieved me 2 hours later, on the proper rotation, not a minute early. I had asked O'Leary with my eyes not to make an exception, and he had understood, because O'Leary always understood. He walked me off the post and into the guardroom and shut the door, and only then, the way he had after the man split my lip years before, did he let me be a man instead of a stone. "The general's asked to dine with you," O'Leary said, privately. He told the Marshal he'd consider it the honor of his life. "You don't have to. I'll make your excuses, they'll hold." I thought about it. I thought about the gray cap coming off the gray head, and for the 80, and a man 40 years a soldier learning the word at my gate. "No," I said, "I'll dine with him." We dined that night, the breaker of the siege at Holt and the only man who walked off Karran Ridge, and we did not speak of the morning, and we did not speak of the ridge, and we did not trade our dead like coins, the way I had wanted to that noon with the words behind my teeth. We were 2 old soldiers, and we spoke of the small things, boots, and the cold, and how the young ones come up now, and whether the bread was better in his army or mine. And once late, he reached across the table and touched the ribbon at my throat, gently this time, the way you touch a thing you finally understand, and he did not say anything, and I let him, and that was all. He went back east a few days later. We wrote for a time a soldier's letters, short, mostly about boots and cold. He died 4 winters on in his bed, which is not how he would have chosen it, but is more than most of us are given. His aide sent word, and sent with the word a thing I keep. The page from Brandt's lecture at Brent, the one on the holding of ground in his own hand. At the bottom, under all the careful soldier's notes about the saddle and the slope and the 3 days, he had added 1 line, late, in a different ink, after the gray noon at my gate. It says, "The survivor is not made of something different. He is made of the same thing as you. He simply did not put it down. I am still at the Sable Gate. I will be here until they decide I am too old to stand, and then I will find some other way to keep the names, because that is the work, and the work does not end. The tourists still photograph the stillness and call it the show. I let them. The stillness is not the show. The stillness is the cost." And 8 inches from my unmoving face, in a place no machine has ever filmed, a man who has every reason in the world to break is holding a line so that the ones who depend on him will find it where he left it. And he is not made of something different than you. He simply has not put it down.